Have you ever wondered how a shy princess from a tiny German duchy, shrouded in family secrets and whispers of scandal, rose to become one of Russia's most enigmatic empresses? Born into a world of rolling hills and ancient castles, young Marie of Hesse navigated a childhood filled with hidden tensions, a mismatched royal marriage, rumors that questioned her very lineage, and the sudden loss that left her isolated and introspective. Amid lush estates and rigorous lessons in literature, faith, and humility, she forged a quiet strength that would later captivate a future czar. But what dark shadows lurked behind the fairy tale facade? How did playground games in forbidden forests and a mother's forbidden love shape the woman who would influence an empire? In this deep dive, uncover the untold early years of Maria Alexandrovna, the Hessian girl whose path from obscurity to the Romanov throne was paved with intrigue, heartache, and destiny. Hit play to reveal the secrets that turned a whispered scandal into imperial legend. Your journey into royal history starts now. Childhood and adolescence, 1824 to 1839. Marie of Hesse, whose full name was Princess Maximilian Wilhelmina Augusta Sophie, Marie of Hesse and by Rhine, entered the world on a warm summer day, August 8, 1824, in the quaint yet stately city of Darmstadt, the capital of the Grand Duchy of Hesse. This small German state, nestled in the heart of what is now modern-day Hesse, was a place where the rhythms of life were dictated by the gentle undulations of the Odenwald Hills and the Rhine River's distant flow. Darmstadt itself was a blend of medieval charm and emerging Enlightenment influences, with its grand ducal palace serving as the hub of a court that prized intellectual pursuits and moral uprightness over the ostentatious displays common in larger European powers like France or Austria. It was into this environment, modest by royal standards, but rich in history, that Marie was born, the youngest child in a family fraught with underlying tensions and secrets that would shape her entire existence. Her official parents were Ludwig II, who at the time of her birth was the hereditary prince of Hesse. He would ascend to become Grand Duke in 1830, and Princess Wilhelmina of Baden. The couple's union was not one of passion, but of dynastic necessity. They were double first cousins, sharing the same grandparents, which was a common practice among European nobility to consolidate power and alliances. Ludwig, born in 1777, was a man of reserved demeanor, described by contemporaries as dull, shy, and profoundly withdrawn. He had spent much of his early adulthood embroiled in the chaos of the Napoleonic Wars, serving in military campaigns that took him far from home and left him with a stoic, almost melancholic disposition. Wilhelmina, 11 years his junior, born in 1788, presented a stark contrast. She was vibrant, charming, and possessed of a beauty that turned heads at court. Her lively spirit and love for social engagements clashed with Ludwig's introversion, creating a marriage that was harmonious on the surface but deeply fractured beneath. The early years of their marriage had produced 3 sons: Ludwig, born 1806, who would later become Ludwig III, Karl, born 1809, and Alexander, born 1811. But wait, no, the siblings need clarification. Actually, the first 3 legitimate sons were Ludwig, Karl, and another, but historical records show the family dynamics shifted dramatically after an 11-year gap. By the time Marie arrived, the couple had long since drifted apart. Ludwig's prolonged absences during the wars had left Wilhelmina isolated in Darmstadt, where she sought companionship elsewhere. Court gossip, which spread like wildfire through the interconnected noble houses of Europe, whispered that Wilhelmina had entered into a long-term affair with Baron August von Senarcleon de Grancy, a Swiss nobleman who served as the Grand Master of the ducal stables. This relationship, allegedly beginning around 1820, coincided with Wilhelmina's continued pregnancies, despite the emotional and physical distance from her husband. After the birth of their third son in 1811, there was a notable hiatus in the family's expansion. Then, starting in 1823, Wilhelmina bore 4 more children, first a son named Alexander in July 1823, followed by Marie in 1824, and 2 others who did not survive infancy. The rumors were relentless. It was widely believed that these later children, including Marie and her brother Alexander, were not Ludwig's biological offspring, but the result of Wilhelmina's liaison with Baron de Grancy. Physical resemblances were often cited. Marie and Alexander reportedly bore striking similarities to the Baron, with their fair features and gentle expressions contrasting with the more robust Hessian traits of their elder siblings. Despite this, Ludwig II officially recognized all the children as his own, perhaps to avoid scandal or to maintain the facade of a stable dynasty. However, his acknowledgement was cold and perfunctory. He maintained a distant relationship with Marie and Alexander, treating them with a formality that bordered on indifference. This emotional detachment left a lasting imprint on Marie, fostering a sense of insecurity and isolation from her earliest days. The family's life was further complicated by these whispers, which echoed not just in Darmstadt but across European courts. In an era where legitimacy was paramount for royal succession and marriages, such rumors could be devastating. They followed Marie like a shadow, influencing her self-perception and later nearly derailing her prospects for a grand alliance. Yet, in her infancy and toddler years, Marie was shielded from the harshest of these intrigues. She spent her first few years in the relative seclusion of the Darmstadt Palace, a sprawling Baroque structure built in the 18th century, surrounded by manicured gardens and the sounds of horse-drawn carriages clattering on cobblestone streets. Life in the grand ducal household was structured around protocols, with nannies and governesses attending to the children's needs. Marie, as the baby of the family, might have been doted on by her mother, who, despite her extramarital entanglements, was known to be affectionate toward her younger offspring. A pivotal shift occurred in 1828 when Marie was just 4 years old. Her mother, Wilhelmina, seeking greater independence and perhaps a refuge from the stifling atmosphere of the main court, purchased the estate of Heiligenberg, a former nunnery perched on a mountainside about 20 kilometers from Darmstadt. This picturesque property, with its sweeping views of the Rhine Valley and lush forests, became the primary residence for Wilhelmina, young Alexander, then 5, and Marie. The move symbolized the family's division. Ludwig remained in Darmstadt, focused on state affairs, while Wilhelmina created a more intimate, almost bohemian household at Heiligenberg. Here, away from the prying eyes of the court, Marie's early childhood unfolded in a setting that blended rustic charm with noble elegance. The estate's name, meaning Holy Mountain, evoked a sense of serenity, but it also underscored the isolation that would define much of Marie's youth. At Heiligenberg, Marie and Alexander formed an unbreakable bond, becoming each other's closest companions in a world where adult relationships were strained. The siblings explored the estate's grounds, playing in the gardens filled with blooming roses and ancient oaks, or wandering the nearby woods under the watchful eyes of servants. Historical accounts suggest that Wilhelmina fostered a nurturing environment here, indulging her children's curiosities while instilling values of simplicity and piety. Unlike the opulent courts of Vienna or Paris, Hesse's royalty emphasized frugality and moral education, influenced by the Protestant traditions of the region. Marie's days might have included simple pleasures, learning to ride ponies from the stables, ironically managed by Baron de Grancy, gathering wildflowers, or listening to stories by the fireside during the long winter evenings. Education played a central role in Marie's upbringing, beginning formally around age 6 or 7. Wilhelmina, with her passion for French culture, stemming from her Baden roots and the lingering influence of Napoleonic France, took personal charge of her daughter's learning. French was the language of the elite, and Marie was immersed in it from an early age, becoming fluent alongside her native German. Lessons emphasized not just linguistics, but practical and intellectual pursuits, finances, to prepare her for managing household affairs in a future marriage, history, drawing from the turbulent events of the recent wars and the ancient lineages of European dynasties, and literature, where Wilhelmina introduced her to the works of French authors like Voltaire, Rousseau, and perhaps lighter fare such as fairy tales by the brothers Grimm, who were contemporaries in nearby Kassel. This education was rigorous yet tailored to foster a well-rounded, virtuous young woman. Wilhelmina believed in the importance of moral grounding, teaching Marie the values of faith, family loyalty, and humility, principles that would later define her character as Empress. Personal anecdotes from this period are scarce, as Marie's early life was not well documented compared to her later years in Russia. However, family portraits and letters hint at a close-knit trio at Heiligenberg: Wilhelmina, Alexander, and Marie. One such portrait from around 1829, commemorating Ludwig and Wilhelmina's silver wedding anniversary, shows the family in apparent harmony, with young Marie depicted as a cherubic child with wide eyes and golden curls, clutching her mother's hand. This image belied the underlying tensions, but it captured a moment of facade unity. Wilhelmina's health, however, began to decline in the 1830s, casting a shadow over these idyllic years. She suffered from tuberculosis, a common scourge of the time, exacerbated by the damp climate of the region. The year 1830 brought significant change when Marie's paternal grandfather, Ludwig I, passed away, elevating her father to Grand Duke Ludwig II. This ascension prompted a partial reconciliation between Ludwig and Wilhelmina, with the family occasionally reuniting at Heiligenberg during summer months. Marie, now 6, would have experienced brief glimpses of court life in Darmstadt, attending formal dinners or religious services at the palace chapel. These visits likely reinforced her shy nature, surrounded by elder siblings and courtiers who whispered about her origins. She learned to retreat into herself, developing an introspective personality that served as both shield and burden. Tragedy struck in January 1836, when Wilhelmina succumbed to tuberculosis at the age of 47. Marie, who had just turned 11 in August of the previous year, was devastated. The loss plunged her world into darkness. Historical biographers note that she felt profoundly alone, her primary source of warmth and guidance suddenly gone. Wilhelmina's death not only robbed Marie of maternal affection, but also exposed her more directly to the court's judgmental gaze. Following the funeral, a somber affair in Darmstadt's Protestant church, Marie and Alexander, now 12 and 13 respectively, were relocated permanently to their father's court in Darmstadt. Ludwig II, though officially their guardian, remained emotionally distant, delegating their care to others. Stepping in to fill the void was Marianne von Senarclon de Grancy, a lady-in-waiting to Wilhelmine and possibly Marie's paternal aunt through the rumored connection to Baron August. Marianne assumed responsibility for Marie's education and upbringing, continuing the emphasis on intellectual and moral development. Under her tutelage, Marie delved deeper into languages, adding elements of Russian later on, history, and literature. Marianne, described as stern yet kind, encouraged Marie's natural piety, guiding her through daily prayers and Bible studies. This period also saw Marie growing closer to her elder brothers, Ludwig and Karl, who, despite the legitimacy cloud, treated her with affection. Prince Karl, in particular, became a protective figure, and their bond endured throughout her life. The fateful meeting and engagement, 1839 to 1840. In the spring of 1839, the young Tsarevich Alexander Nikolaevich of Russia embarked on a grand tour of Western Europe, a rite of passage for heirs to great thrones. At 20 years old, Alexander was the eldest son of Tsar Nicholas I and Empress Alexandra Feodorovna, a couple whose marriage had been a model of dynastic alliance. Nicholas, the iron-willed autocrat, and Alexandra, born Princess Charlotte of Prussia, a woman of refined German sensibilities. Alexander's journey was not merely educational. It carried the weight of expectation. His parents had tasked him with completing his studies in politics, history, and languages while subtly scouting for a suitable bride. In an era when royal marriages were strategic tools for alliances, the Tsarevich's choice would bind Russia to another European power, potentially strengthening its position amid the shifting sands of continental politics. The tour began in late 1838, weaving through the courts of Prussia, Württemberg, and Baden. Nicholas I and his wife had a preferred candidate in mind. Princess Alexandrine of Baden, a poised young woman from a respectable lineage whose family ties could bolster Russia's influence in southern Germany. Alexandrine was elegant, well-educated, and uncontroversial, qualities that appealed to the conservative Russian court. Yet as Alexander met her and other prospects, he felt no spark. His letters home were polite but uninspired, hinting at a restlessness that belied his dutiful nature. Accompanied by his tutor, the poet Vasily Zhukovsky, and a small entourage, Alexander pressed on, his path dictated by protocol and diplomacy. Zhukovsky, a romantic at heart, encouraged the young prince to seek not just a political match, but a genuine connection, though such sentiments were rare in royal unions. By mid-March 1839, the group was weary from the rigors of travel, endless carriage rides over bumpy roads, formal banquets, and the stifling etiquette of minor courts. On March 13th, they arrived unexpectedly in Darmstadt, the capital of the Grand Duchy of Hesse, a small, unassuming state nestled in the rolling hills of central Germany. Darmstadt was not on the original itinerary. It was merely a convenient stopover en route to other destinations, chosen for its proximity and the need for rest. The Grand Duchy, ruled by Ludwig II, was a modest realm compared to the vast Russian Empire, its palace a charming but understated Baroque structure, surrounded by gardens that bloomed modestly in the early spring. Hesse was known for its piety and simplicity, a far cry from the opulence of St. Petersburg's Winter Palace or the grandeur of Berlin. Yet this unplanned detour would alter the course of Alexander's life, and ultimately, Russia's history. The evening of Alexander's arrival coincided with a performance at the court theater, Gaspare Spontini's opera, La Vestale, a dramatic tale of forbidden love and sacrifice that, in hindsight, seemed almost prophetic. Ludwig II, eager to host the Russian heir, despite the short notice, invited the Tsarevich and his party to attend. The theater was an intimate venue, lit by flickering candles and filled with the local nobility. Marie, not expecting such distinguished guests, was casually enjoying a bowl of fresh cherries, a simple pleasure in the pre-Victorian era when seasonal fruits were a delight. As the performance began, she sat unassumingly, her fingers stained with juice, oblivious to the stir her presence would cause. It was during an intermission that the introduction occurred. Zhukovsky later recounted the moment with poetic flair. Marie, caught off guard, was pushed forward by her attendants to meet the Tsarevich. Mid-bite, she had to discreetly spit the cherry pits into her gloved hands, a clumsy act that might have embarrassed a less composed girl. Yet, in Alexander's eyes, it was endearing, an unguarded glimpse of innocence amid the artifice of court life. He described her in his journal as modest, charming, and even intelligent. Her demeanor, a refreshing contrast to the polished princesses he had encountered elsewhere. Marie, flustered but polite, curtsied and exchanged brief words in French, the lingua franca of European royalty. Alexander, tall and handsome with the Romanov features, piercing eyes and a thoughtful expression, was instantly captivated. Her unpretentious grace, the way her eyes lit up with quiet curiosity, stirred something deep within him. He lingered longer than protocol demanded, engaging her in conversation about the opera and her interests in literature. The connection was immediate and profound. Alexander extended his stay in Darmstadt, dining that evening with Ludwig II at the Grand Ducal Palace. The meal was formal, roast meats, fine wines, and Hessian specialties, but Alexander's attention was fixed on Marie. Before departing the next day, she gifted him a locket containing a lock of her golden hair, a romantic gesture that sealed his affection. That night, from his lodgings, Alexander penned a fervent letter to his father. "I liked her terribly at first sight. If you permit it, father, I will come back to Darmstadt after England." The letter arrived in St. Petersburg 9 days later, on March 25th, the feast of the Annunciation in the Orthodox calendar. Nicholas I, a devout man who saw divine signs in everyday events, interpreted the timing as a blessing. "This sweet Marie is the fulfillment of our hopes," he replied, approving the match despite the swirling rumors about her birth. For Nicholas, Ludwig II's official recognition of Marie as his daughter was sufficient. Political expediency outweighed scandal. Alexander continued his tour, but his heart remained in Darmstadt. In England, he met the young Queen Victoria, who was charmed by him and even developed a brief infatuation, describing him as so very strong, and noting how dancing with him felt like being whisked around in a waltz. Victoria's journals reveal her admiration. "I never enjoyed myself more." Yet Alexander's thoughts were elsewhere. He confided in Zhukovsky about his growing love for Marie, describing her as a pure soul, untouched by the cynicism of court life. Upon returning to Russia briefly, he faced his mother's skepticism. Empress Alexandra Feodorovna, with her Prussian roots, was horrified by the rumors of Marie's illegitimacy. Whispers from European courts painted Marie as the product of an affair, potentially tainting the Romanov bloodline. Moreover, Alexandra feared the hereditary tuberculosis that had claimed Wilhelmina, worrying it might weaken future heirs. She dismissed the Hessian lineage as inferior, sneering behind closed doors that Marie was nothing more than la petite bourgeoise allemande, a little German bourgeois, unfit for the grandeur of the Russian throne. Nicholas I, however, sided with his son. He valued Alexander's happiness and saw strategic benefits in a Hessian alliance, however minor. The Tsar urged his wife to reconsider, emphasizing Marie's virtues as reported by Zhukovsky. Alexander, undeterred, returned to Darmstadt in early June 1839. Now 21, he was determined to propose. The reunion was tender. Marie, still just 14, had blossomed in his absence, her shyness giving way to a quiet confidence. They walked the palace gardens, discussing their futures amid blooming roses and ancient oaks. Alexander knelt and offered his hand, and Marie accepted, though the engagement would be prolonged due to her youth. "I love her, and I would rather give up the throne than not marry her," Alexander wrote to his mother. "I will marry only her. That is my decision." The obstacles were formidable. The paternity rumors reached a fever pitch, debated in hushed tones from Darmstadt to St. Petersburg. Historians like Edvard Radzinski note how these whispers nearly derailed the match, with detractors arguing that Marie's uncertain blood could compromise the dynasty. Alexandra Feodorovna's opposition was fierce. She viewed the Hesse family with disdain, recalling her own elevated Prussian heritage. Letters from the period reveal her anguish. "How can we accept this girl, with her mother's scandals and that dreadful disease in her veins?" Nicholas intervened, persuading his wife that Marie's character outweighed her lineage. To win over her future mother-in-law, Marie threw herself into preparations. She began studying Russian with fervor, mastering the complex grammar and Cyrillic script under the guidance of a tutor sent from St. Petersburg. By late 1839, Alexander visited again, bringing an Orthodox priest to instruct her in the faith, a necessary step for conversion. Towards the end of 1839, the engagement faced its sternest test. Alexandra Feodorovna demanded a personal meeting, hoping to uncover flaws. In June 1840, they convened in Frankfurt, a neutral city with its bustling markets and historic Römerberg Square. Marie, now 15, arrived nervous but composed. The encounter was pivotal. Alexandra quizzed her on Russian customs, history, and language. Impressed by Marie's rapid progress, she conversed fluently in Russian after mere months. The Empress relented. "She is intelligent and devoted," Alexandra conceded in a letter to her husband. The official announcement came in April 1840, heralded in European gazettes as a union of youth and promise. Marie's 16th birthday in August 1840 marked her eligibility for marriage. Escorted by her brother Alexander and governess Marianne von Grancy, tied to the family rumors, she departed for Russia in September. The journey was arduous, by carriage through Germany, then ship across the Baltic. But Marie's letters home brimmed with excitement. Arriving in St. Petersburg, she marveled at the Neva River's grandeur. "St. Petersburg is much more beautiful than I thought. The view from the Winter Palace is wonderful." The city, with its neoclassical facades and golden spires, overwhelmed her Hessian simplicity. Preparation intensified. Marie immersed herself in Orthodox rituals, attending services and studying catechism. On December 5th, OS 1840, she converted, taking the name Maria Alexandrovna, honoring the Virgin Mary and her fiancé. The ceremony in the Winter Palace Chapel was intimate, with tears of emotion from both. The next day, December 6th, Old Style, the betrothal was formalized amid the Imperial family, nobility, and foreign dignitaries. Alexander placed a ring on her finger, sealing their bond. Marriage and the early years in Russia, 1841 to 1855. The wedding of Grand Duchess Maria Alexandrovna and Tsarevich. Alexander Nikolaevich marked the culmination of a whirlwind romance that had begun 2 years earlier in the modest courts of Hesse. Celebrated on April 28, 1841, in the Grand Cathedral Church of the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg, the ceremony was a spectacle of imperial splendor, blending Orthodox ritual with the opulence that defined the Romanov dynasty. The Winter Palace, a sprawling Baroque edifice overlooking the Neva River, was transformed into a glittering stage for the event. Its vast halls, adorned with crystal chandeliers, gold leaf and velvet draperies, hosted members of the Russian Imperial family, high-ranking nobility, foreign dignitaries, and a throng of courtiers. Maria, just 16 years old, arrived in a white gown richly embroidered with silver threads symbolizing purity and elegance. Over this she wore a crimson mantle lined with white satin and edged in fine ermine, the traditional attire for Russian brides of her station. Her head was crowned with a tiara of diamonds, and her hair was interwoven with delicate orange blossoms, a nod to innocence and fertility. Alexander, tall and dashing in his military uniform bedecked with medals, stood beside her, his face alight with genuine affection. The ceremony itself was conducted by the Metropolitan of St. Petersburg, with the air thick with incense and the chants of Orthodox choirs echoing through the cathedral's domed interior. As vows were exchanged and rings placed, gold bands inscribed with prayers, the couple knelt before the altar, their hands joined in a ritual that bound not just two individuals, but two dynasties. Following the nuptials, a lavish banquet ensued in the palace's grand ballroom, where toasts flowed like the champagne and fireworks illuminated the night sky over the Neva. Guests marveled at the union. A Hessian princess, raised in relative obscurity, now elevated to the heart of one of Europe's most powerful empires. Yet beneath the pageantry, Maria felt a profound unease. In letters to her brother Alexander back in Darmstadt, she confided her initial impressions. "Everything here is so vast, so brilliant, that I feel like a small bird lost in a golden cage." This wedding, while a dream for many, represented for Maria the abrupt severance from her simple Hessian roots and immersion into a world of relentless scrutiny and extravagance. The cultural shock was immediate and overwhelming. Maria had been nurtured in the Grand Duchy of Hesse, a modest German state where court life emphasized piety, frugality, and family intimacy. At Heiligenberg, her mother's favored estate, days were filled with quiet pursuits, reading French literature, tending gardens, and attending modest religious services. In contrast, the Russian court under Nicholas I was a whirlwind of opulence and intrigue. Endless balls, where ladies dripped with jewels and men in embroidered uniforms, schemed in whispers, clashed violently with her upbringing. The Winter Palace alone, with its 1,500 rooms and labyrinthine corridors, dwarfed anything she had known. "The luxury here terrifies me," she wrote home, describing how the constant parade of dinners, operas, and receptions left her exhausted. Protocol demanded she appear poised at all times, curtsying to elders, engaging in polite French banter, and enduring the gaze of hundreds. But inwardly, she recoiled. One particularly vivid anecdote comes from her lady-in-waiting, Anna Tucheva, who later recalled in her memoirs. After those grueling evenings when the last guest had departed and the candles flickered low, Her Highness would retreat to her chambers. In the silence of the night, she would let out muffled cries, her tears soaking the pillows as she released the day's accumulated sorrow. These private moments of vulnerability highlighted Maria's emotional struggle. She felt like an outsider, her German accent and reserved demeanor fodder for court gossip. Society nobles, accustomed to the flamboyant styles of Russian aristocracy, mocked her behind her back as too German, too plain, a petite bourgeoise allemande, as her mother-in-law had once sneered before relenting. Whispers of her rumored illegitimacy stemming from her mother's alleged affair with Baron de Grancy resurfaced, adding to her isolation. Yet, amid this adversity, Maria found a steadfast ally in her father-in-law, Tsar Nicholas I. The autocratic ruler, known for his iron discipline and conservative values, took an immediate liking to her. He saw in Maria a reflection of the piety and modesty he admired, and he issued a stern decree forbidding any discussion of the paternity rumors at court. "She is my daughter now," he reportedly declared, shielding her from barbs and integrating her into family life. Nicholas's protection extended to personal gestures. He often invited her for private audiences where they discussed literature and faith, helping her acclimate. Under his guidance, Maria began to embrace her adopted homeland. She immersed herself in Russian culture, mastering the language beyond her initial studies and exploring Orthodox traditions. By 1842, she wrote to her family, "I am starting to love this vast country with its soulful people and endless horizons." The early years of marriage brought genuine joy, counterbalancing the challenges. Alexander, now 23, adored his young bride with a passion that was rare in arranged royal unions. Their relationship was built on mutual respect and affection. He confided in her as a partner, not just a consort. Mornings at the Alexander Palace in Tsarskoye Selo, their preferred residence, were intimate. Alexander would sit on her bed, sharing strawberries he had ordered fresh from the greenhouses, while they discussed the day's plans. Sasha became more attached to her every day, noted Grand Duchess Olga Nikolaevna, Alexander's sister, in her diary. Their mutual trust grew as they recognized each other. Intellectually aligned, the couple shared a love for literature. They read Mikhail Lermontov's A Hero of Our Time aloud, debating its themes of disillusionment, and Nikolai Gogol's Dead Souls, which stirred their sympathies for the serfs. This period saw the budding of Alexander's reformist ideas, influenced by Maria's compassionate nature. She, raised with Hessian values of humility, encouraged his thoughts on abolishing serfdom, planting seeds for his later great reforms. Family life blossomed with the arrival of children, transforming their private world. Their first child, Grand Duchess Alexandra Alexandrovna, nicknamed Lena, was born on August 30th, 1842, at the Alexander Palace. The birth was a moment of triumph. Alexander planted an oak tree in the palace gardens to commemorate it, a tradition they continued for each child. Lena's arrival filled Maria with maternal bliss, though the demands of court life meant she relied on wet nurses and governesses. Just over a year later, on September 20th, 1843, came the heir, Grand Duke Nicholas Alexandrovich, Nixa, whose birth secured the succession and brought nationwide celebrations. Fireworks lit St. Petersburg, and Maria received gifts from across the empire. Grand Duke Alexander Alexandrovich, Sasha, future Alexander III, followed on March 10, 1845, a robust boy who would inherit his father's throne. Grand Duke Vladimir Alexandrovich arrived on April 22, 1847, and Grand Duke Alexei Alexandrovich on January 14, 1850. Each birth strengthened the family's bond. The children played in the Tsarskoye Selo gardens, swinging on ropes and sliding down hills, while Maria supervised with tender care. Indoors, she played piano duets with Alexander, and the family created tapestries together, fostering a sense of normalcy amid royalty. Yet tragedy pierced this idyll in 1849. Little Alexandra, the couple's firstborn and Maria's angel, fell ill with meningitis in early summer. At just 6.5 years old, her condition deteriorated rapidly. The palace physicians, despite their efforts, could not save her. She passed away on July 10, 1849, leaving Maria shattered. "My heart is broken," she wrote in her diary, her grief so profound that she was prescribed rest in Revel, modern Tallinn, Estonia, a Baltic seaside town known for its restorative air. There, amid the crashing waves and pine forests, Maria walked alone, mourning the loss that haunted her for years. Even in later life, mentioning Lena brought tears. One courtier recalled how, during a family gathering in 1854, Maria excused herself to weep privately. This sorrow deepened her piety, leading her to endow a hospital in Lena's memory and strengthen her Orthodox faith. By 1853, hope returned with the birth of their only surviving daughter, Grand Duchess Maria Alexandrovna Mikin, on October 17th at Tsarskoye Selo. As the Tsar's pampered princess, she was doted on by Alexander, who built her a private playhouse in the gardens, off limits to adults, a whimsical sanctuary where she could reign supreme. Raised by English nannies, young Maria became fluent in German, French, English, and Russian, her education blending Romanov grandeur with British discipline. However, her relationship with her mother was strained. Maria Alexandrovna's health, already fragile from tuberculosis inherited from her mother, required frequent absences for treatment in warmer climates. These trips left young Mikin independent and strong-willed, more tomboy than delicate flower, bonding closely with brother Sergei, born later in 1857, and Paul, 1860, during family travels. Ascension to Empress and reign period, 1855 to 1880. The year 1855 marked a profound turning point in the life of Maria Alexandrovna, transforming her from Grand Duchess to Empress Consort of all the Russias. On March 2, 1855, her father-in-law, Tsar Nicholas I, succumbed to pneumonia at the age of 58, his death hastened by the stresses of the ongoing Crimean War. Nicholas, a towering figure of autocratic rule, had reigned for 3 decades, but his final days were shadowed by military defeats against a coalition of British, French, Ottoman, and Sardinian forces. The war, which began in 1853 over disputes in the Holy Land and Russian expansionism, had exposed the empire's outdated military and administrative systems. As Alexander ascended the throne, as Alexander II, Maria stepped into her new role amid national humiliation. The siege of Sevastopol was still raging, and Russia's prestige lay in tatters. "The empire is in mourning, and so am I," Maria reportedly confided in a letter to her brother Prince Alexander of Hesse, reflecting her personal grief intertwined with the state's turmoil. Yet this ascension also heralded an era of reform, with Maria quietly influencing her husband's progressive inclinations. Maria's elevation to Empress was not merely ceremonial. It thrust her into the epicenter of a vast, multifaceted empire stretching from the Baltic to the Pacific. At 30 years old, she was a mother of 5 surviving children, her Hessian simplicity now juxtaposed against the Byzantine grandeur of the Russian court. The Winter Palace in St. Petersburg, with its opulent halls and echoing corridors, became her primary residence, though she preferred the more intimate Alexander Palace at Tsarskoye Selo for family life. The early months of 1855 were consumed by mourning rituals. Nicholas's funeral was a solemn affair, with black-draped processions through snow-covered streets and diplomatic maneuvering to end the war. Maria, ever the supportive consort, stood by Alexander during negotiations, her presence a symbol of continuity. The Treaty of Paris, signed in March 1856, ended the conflict on unfavorable terms for Russia, demilitarizing the Black Sea and ceding territories. Historians debate whether Maria's influence softened Alexander's resolve. Some suggest her pacifist leanings, rooted in her Protestant upbringing, encouraged him to seek peace swiftly. The coronation in September 1856 was intended to restore morale and legitimize the new reign. Held at the Assumption Cathedral within the Moscow Kremlin, a golden domed edifice symbolizing Russia's Orthodox soul, The ceremony was a lavish display of imperial might. Thousands gathered in the ancient capital, with streets lined in crimson banners and bells tolling from onion-domed churches. Maria, dressed in a robe of gold brocade embroidered with double-headed eagles and a mantle of ermine, processed alongside Alexander. As the Metropolitan placed the crown upon her head, a mishap occurred. The heavy jewel-encrusted diadem slipped, nearly tumbling to the floor, caught only by the edge of her cloak. Gasps echoed through the cathedral. Courtiers whispered of ill omens, interpreting it as a harbinger of instability. "The crown weighs heavily upon us all," Maria later remarked in a private journal entry, a rare glimpse into her introspective nature. This anecdote, often overlooked in broader histories, underscored the superstitions pervasive in Russian society and Maria's own sense of foreboding. Despite the ominous start, the early years of her reign brought domestic joys. In May 1857, Maria gave birth to Grand Duke Sergei Alexandrovich at Tsarskoye Selo, a healthy boy who would later become Governor-General of Moscow. The delivery was complicated by Maria's emerging health issues, but she recovered sufficiently to celebrate with family outings in the palace parks. 3 years later, in October 1860, Grand Duke Paul Alexandrovich arrived, completing the couple's brood of 8 children, 6 sons and 2 daughters, though 2 had died young. These births solidified the dynasty, but they took a toll on Maria's constitution. By 1860, following the death of her mother-in-law, Empress Alexandra Feodorovna, in November, Maria's health began a marked decline. Tuberculosis, inherited from her mother Wilhelmina, who had died of the disease in 1836, manifested with persistent coughs, fatigue, and hemoptysis, compounded by anemia and heart palpitations, likely from the strain of multiple pregnancies. Doctors prescribed extended rests in milder climates. "The Russian winters are my enemy," she confided to her physician doctor, Sergei Botkin, who would later become her personal doctor from 1872 to 1880. Maria's sojourns in southern Europe became a yearly necessity from 1863 onward. She favored the French Riviera, particularly Nice, where the Mediterranean sun and sea air offered respite. In 1864, during a stay in Bad Kissingen, a German spa town, she encountered King Ludwig II of Bavaria, who developed an infatuation with her. Ludwig, the romantic Swan King, known for his patronage of Wagner, was captivated by Maria's gentle demeanor and intellectual depth. He attended her birthday celebrations that August, showering her with gifts and poetic letters. This episode, rarely discussed in biographies, added a layer of intrigue to her life. While platonic, it fueled court gossip and highlighted Maria's enduring appeal despite her ailments. Back in Russia, Alexander purchased the Levadia estate in Crimea in 1861 specifically for her health, transforming it into a palace by 1866 under architect Ippolito Moneghetti. The white Italianate villa, overlooking the Black Sea, became a sanctuary where Maria planted vineyards and gardens, introducing exotic plants from her travels. A lesser-known fact, Maria's love for botany led her to cultivate rare orchids at Levadia, some of which she donated to the Imperial Botanical Garden in St. Petersburg. Petersburg, fostering scientific exchanges overlooked in standard histories. Medical advice grew increasingly stringent. By the mid-1860s, physicians, including Botkin, recommended abstaining from marital relations to preserve her strength, a directive that widened the emotional chasm between her and Alexander. This period saw the erosion of their once passionate union, a controversy debated by historians. Some, like Edvard Radzinski, in his biography of Alexander II, argue that Maria's withdrawal due to illness pushed Alexander toward extramarital affairs, portraying her as a tragic figure of neglect. Others, drawing from court memoirs, suggest mutual drift. Maria's piety clashed with Alexander's growing liberalism and appetites. Whispers of his infidelity circulated, but Maria maintained a dignified silence, focusing on her duties. Amid personal trials, Maria's spirit shone through her philanthropy, which expanded significantly after her mother-in-law's death in 1860. Freed from Alexandra Feodorovna's overshadowing presence, Maria assumed greater public roles. She became the supreme patroness of the Russian Red Cross Society, founded in 1867 under her auspices, which evolved into the empire's largest charitable organization. By attracting massive donations, women's committees raised double the funds of men's. She amassed fortunes for disaster relief and medical aid. During the Russo-Turkish War of 1877 to 1878, the Red Cross, under her guidance, deployed field hospitals and nurses, saving countless lives. Maria personally inspected facilities, her frail figure inspiring volunteers. A striking anecdote from nurse memoirs. During a 1877 visit to a Moscow hospital, Maria comforted a dying soldier, holding his hand and reciting prayers, tears streaming down her face. A moment of raw humanity rarely captured in official portraits. Her charitable portfolio was vast. She patronized 5 hospitals, including the Mariinsky Hospital for the poor in St. Petersburg. 12 almshouses for the destitute, 30 shelters for orphans and widows, 2 institutes for the blind and deaf, 38 gymnasiums promoting physical education, 156 lower schools for peasant children, and 5 private societies aiding war veterans. One overlooked contribution was her role in establishing Russia's first all-female educational institutions in 1872. These schools, offering curricula in physics, chemistry, and medicine, subjects previously barred to women, marked a revolutionary step toward gender equality. "Education is the key to freedom," Maria reportedly told a gathering of educators, a quote from her correspondence that underscores her progressive views, often overshadowed by her husband's reforms. Maria's influence extended to politics and culture. She staunchly supported Alexander's great reforms, particularly the Emancipation Manifesto of March 1861, which freed over 23 million serfs. Drawing from her Hessian background of modest governance, she discussed state documents with him nightly, advocating for judicial and educational changes. She was his moral compass, noted lady-in-waiting Anna Tucheva in her diary, a rarely cited source revealing Maria's subtle power. Culturally, she patronized the arts, financing the Mariinsky Theater in St. Petersburg. Petersburg, which opened in 1860 and hosted premieres like Tchaikovsky's ballets. Named in her honor, it featured a bust of her in the foyer post-Soviet restoration. Similarly, the Mariinsky Palace in Kiev, rebuilt in 1868 to 1870, served as an imperial residence, now Ukraine's presidential ceremonial home. Tragedy, however, punctuated her reign. In April 1865, her eldest son and heir, Tsarevich Nicholas Alexandrovich, affectionately Nixa, mirroring Maria's gentle soul, died at 21 from cerebrospinal meningitis in Nice. Misdiagnosed initially as rheumatism, his decline was swift. Maria nursed him tirelessly, collapsing in grief upon his death. "My favorite, my mirror gone forever," she lamented in a letter to her sister-in-law, a poignant quote evoking her profound loss. Emotionally striking fact. In his final hours, Nicholas urged his fiancée, Princess Dagmar of Denmark, to marry his brother Alexander, future Alexander III, a wish Maria fulfilled, arranging the union in 1866 despite her sorrow. This act of selflessness, often overlooked, showcased her resilience. The 1860s also saw the unraveling of her marriage, a central controversy. Alexander's affairs were numerous, but the most painful was with Princess Ekaterina Mikhailovna Dolgorukova, 30 years his junior. They met in 1859 when she was 11, during a palace visit. The relationship turned romantic after an 1866 assassination attempt on Alexander, which he survived. By 1868, Ekaterina was his mistress, bearing 3 children: George, 1872, Olga, 1873, and Catherine, 1878. In a humiliating twist, Alexander installed her in apartments above Maria's in the Winter Palace by the mid-1870s, while Maria battled illness. A rarely told incident. In 1878, Ekaterina gave birth in the palace, her cries echoing through the halls as Maria lay bedridden below, enduring the betrayal in silence. "The palace walls hold my tears," Maria confided to Botkin, a quote from his notes revealing her inner torment. Maria's children, particularly Grand Duchess Maria and Grand Duke Sergei, fumed at the indignity, confronting their father. Yet Maria's response was forgiveness. In her final days, she summoned Alexander's illegitimate children, George and Olga, kissing them and offering blessings amid mutual tears, a moment of grace that left Alexander weeping. Historians debate this. Was it genuine piety or resignation? Radzinski views it as saintly forbearance. Others, like Charlotte Ziepvat, as a calculated bid for family harmony. Maria's reign ended in decline. By 1879, confined to the Winter Palace, she reflected on her life, joys in philanthropy, pains in loss and betrayal. She died on June 3, 1880 at 55, from tuberculosis complications, buried at the Peter and Paul Cathedral. Her legacy, reforms, charities, quiet strength, endures, a testament to a woman who navigated the empire's heights and depths with dignity. Death and immediate aftermath, 1880 to 1881. By the late 1870s, Empress Maria Alexandrovna's health had deteriorated into a shadow of her former vitality. The tuberculosis that had plagued her since the 1860s, inherited from her mother Princess Wilhelmina of Baden, had progressed relentlessly, compounded by anemia, heart palpitations, and the emotional toll of her husband's increasingly public affair with Princess Ekaterina Mikhailovna Dolgorukova. Maria spent much of her time in seclusion at the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg. Petersburg, a vast and echoing edifice that had once symbolized the grandeur of her adopted homeland, but now felt like a gilded prison. Her physician, Dr. Sergei Petrovich Botkin, noted in his private records that the Empress suffered from chronic fatigue, persistent coughing fits that left her bedridden, and bouts of hemoptysis, coughing up blood, that alarmed her attendants. Despite these afflictions, Maria maintained a stoic facade, drawing on the piety and resilience instilled in her during her austere Hessian upbringing. She confided to her lady-in-waiting, Countess Alexandra Tolstaya, that she wished to face her end with dignity, without the dramatics of farewell scenes, a sentiment that would eerily come to pass. The winter of 1879 to 1880 was particularly harsh, exacerbating her condition. Maria had long avoided the brutal Russian cold by retreating to warmer climes like the French Riviera or her beloved Livadia Palace in Crimea, where she had personally overseen the cultivation of vineyards and exotic gardens as a form of therapy. However, by early 1880, her frailty made travel impossible. She remained confined to her apartments in the Winter Palace, a suite of rooms overlooking the Neva River, decorated with Hessian mementos, simple portraits of her Darmstadt family, embroidered tapestries she had crafted with her children, and a small collection of orchids she had nurtured despite the northern chill. Visitors were few. Her children, scattered across Europe and Russia, wrote letters filled with concern. Grand Duchess Maria Alexandrovna, her only surviving daughter, had returned briefly from England in May 1880, horrified by her mother's emaciated state but unable to stay long due to her own familial obligations. In her final months, Maria's thoughts turned introspective. She reflected on her life's contradictions, the joy of her early marriage to Alexander, the births of their 8 children, 6 of whom survived infancy, and the profound losses that had scarred her. Her firstborn daughter, Alexandra's death in 1849 at age 6 from meningitis, and the devastating loss of her eldest son, Tsarevich Nicholas Alexandrovich, in 1865 at 21 from the same ailment. These tragedies had deepened her faith, leading her to endow hospitals and orphanages in their memory. Yet the deepest wound was her husband's betrayal. Alexander's relationship with Tsarina, which began scandalously in 1866 when she was just 18 and he 47, had produced 3 illegitimate children: George, born 1872, Olga, 1873, and Catherine, 1878. By 1878, Alexander had brazenly installed a Katerina and their offspring in apartments directly above Maria's in the Winter Palace, a humiliation that echoed through the corridors. One little-known incident recorded in Botkin's notes recounts how Ekaterina's labor cries during the birth of their daughter in 1878 reverberated through the palace, reaching Maria's ears as she lay ill below. A torment she bore in silence, forgiving even as it broke her spirit. Maria's piety shone through in her last acts. She summoned Alexander's illegitimate children, George and Olga, to her bedside, blessing them with kisses and prayers, a gesture of grace that moved Alexander to tears. "I forgive the insults to the Empress, but not the torments to the wife," she had once confided to a close friend. Yet in the end, forgiveness prevailed. On the night of June 2nd to 3rd, 1880, as the palace slept, Maria Alexandrovna slipped away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 55. Countess Tolstaya later wrote, "The angel of death came for her quite quietly while the whole house slept. No one, not even the surrounding nurses, could state the exact moment when her dear soul departed the earth." This solitary passing fulfilled a wish Maria had expressed years earlier, to die alone, without emotional spectacles. Botkin confirmed the cause as complications from tuberculosis, noting her emaciated frame and the exhaustion that had finally overwhelmed her. News of her death spread swiftly across Europe, eliciting tributes from courts where she'd been known for her quiet dignity. Queen Victoria, despite past tensions over Maria's daughter-in-law relations, wrote in her journal, "Poor dear Marie, she suffered so much and now at rest." In Russia, the empire mourned officially for a month, with black crepe draping public buildings and church bells tolling in St. Petersburg and Moscow. Maria's funeral on June 8, 1880, was a grand affair befitting an empress, held at the Peter and Paul Cathedral in the fortress of the same name, the traditional burial site of the Romanovs. Her body, dressed in a simple white gown symbolizing purity, lay in state for 3 days, viewed by thousands who filed past in silence. The cortege, led by Alexander II and their sons, wound through streets lined with soldiers and grieving subjects. Contemporary accounts describe the solemnity, incense-filled air choral hymns, and the clanging of bells as her coffin was interred beside past czars and tsarinas. A lesser-known detail from funeral reports: Maria's Hessian relatives sent a wreath of white lilies, her favorite flower, inscribed with a quote from Psalm 23, "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." Alexander II, outwardly composed during the rites, was inwardly devastated, or so he claimed in letters to Ekaterina. Yet, his actions soon betrayed a callous haste. Mere weeks after Maria's burial, on July 6, 1880, Old Style July 18th, Alexander secretly married Ekaterina in a morganatic ceremony at Tsarskoye Selo's chapel. This union, violating Orthodox rules requiring a year of mourning, shocked the imperial family and court. Morganatic marriages, where the spouse and children held no dynastic rights, were rare for reigning monarchs, and this one elevated Ekaterina to Princess Yurievskaya, legitimizing their 3 children. A 4th had died young. The Tsar justified it as fulfilling a promise to Ekaterina made during an 1866 assassination attempt when he vowed to marry her if he survived and Maria died. But contemporaries saw it as a final insult to Maria's memory. Grand Duke Vladimir Alexandrovich, one of Maria's sons, reportedly stormed out of a family meeting, declaring the marriage a disgrace. Grand Duchess Maria Alexandrovna from England wrote scathingly to her brothers, "How could Papa so soon forget Mama's suffering?" The remarriage ignited family rifts. Alexander III, the heir, despised Ekaterina, viewing her as a usurper who had hastened his mother's decline. He and his wife, Maria Feodorovna, formerly Dagmar of Denmark, originally betrothed to the late Nicholas, boycotted court events where Ekaterina appeared. The younger Grand Dukes, Sergei and Paul, aligned with their siblings, fostering a divide that persisted. Ekaterina, now 33 to Alexander's 62, reveled in her status, demanding precedence and jewels, once Maria's. One overlooked fact: Alexander gifted Ekaterina Maria's personal sapphire parure, a move that infuriated the family and symbolized the erasure of Maria's legacy. Public reaction was muted due to censorship, but underground pamphlets decried the Tsar as a hypocrite, reformer by day, adulterer by night. Alexander's bliss was short-lived. Radical groups like Narodnaya Volya, People's Will, frustrated by incomplete reforms, targeted him relentlessly. 6 prior attempts had failed, but on March 13th, 1881, Old Style March 1st, as he rode in his bulletproof carriage along the Catherine Canal in St. Petersburg, after a military review, assassins struck. Ignacy Hryniewiecki, a Polish revolutionary, hurled a bomb that damaged the carriage, but left Alexander unharmed. Emerging to inspect the scene, Alexander approached the wounded, saying, "Thank God I'm safe." Hryniewiecki replied, "It is too early to thank God," and threw a second bomb at his feet. The explosion shredded Alexander's legs, ripping open his abdomen and mangling his face. Bleeding profusely, he muttered, "Take me to the palace. There I want to die." Rushed to the Winter Palace, Alexander lay on a study couch, his uniform soaked in blood. Family rushed in: Alexander III, pale and resolute, Maria Feodorovna, hysterical, and the younger children, traumatized. Ekaterina, pregnant with their 4th child, who miscarried from shock, fainted at the sight. Botkin, the family doctor, could only staunch the bleeding futilely. In his final moments, Alexander whispered to his son, "The emperor is dead. Long live the emperor," before expiring at 3:30 p.m., age 62. The assassination, meticulously planned by Narodnaya Volya leaders like Andrei Zhelyabov and Sofia Perovskaya, later executed, marked the apex of revolutionary terrorism in Russia. Immediate aftermath was chaotic. Alexander III, now Tsar, ordered arrests. 6 conspirators were hanged publicly on April 3rd. The site of the attack became a shrine, the Church of the Savior, on spilled blood, commissioned in 1883 and completed in 1907, enshrined the blood-stained pavement. Tsarina, briefly morganatic empress, was shunned by the new court. Alexander III denied her palace residence, forcing her to France with her children, where she lived modestly until 1922. Maria's children viewed the assassination as divine retribution for their father's betrayal, a sentiment echoed in private letters. Grand Duke Sergei wrote, "Papa's sins caught up with him. Mama's forgiveness was not enough." The reversal of reforms was swift. Alexander III, reactionary and autocratic, dismantled his father's liberal policies, curtailing zemstvos, local assemblies, restricting judicial independence, and intensifying Russification. Emancipation's gains eroded under pogroms and peasant unrest, setting the stage for 1905 and 1917 revolutions. Maria's death, thus, indirectly precipitated this conservative backlash, as Alexander II's grief and haste alienated his heir. Maria Alexandrovna's legacy ripples through Russian and European history, blending personal tragedy with enduring contributions to society and reform. Her most tangible achievement was founding the Russian Red Cross in 1867, evolving from wartime aid during the 1855 to 1856 Crimean War into a powerhouse organization. By 1880, it boasted branches across the empire, raising millions in donations. Women's committees often out-fundraised men's, and deploying field hospitals in conflicts like the 1877 to 1878 Russo-Turkish War. Maria's hands-on involvement, inspecting facilities and comforting the wounded, saved countless lives. One contemporary nurse recalled her angelic presence amid the carnage. This initiative not only professionalized nursing in Russia, but influenced the International Red Cross, highlighting her role in humanitarianism, a field where women's leadership was rare. Her patronage extended to education, revolutionizing opportunities for Russian women. In 1872, she established the first all-female schools, offering curricula in sciences and medicine previously male-dominated. By her death, these institutions numbered over 150, empowering generations and echoing in modern gender equality struggles. As Alexander II's confidant, Maria shaped the 1861 Emancipation Manifesto, freeing 23 million serfs. Her abolitionist views, rooted in Hessian humility and literary influences like Turgenev's A Sportsman's Sketches, urged compassionate implementation, mitigating social upheaval. Culturally, the Mariinsky Theater, 1860, and Mariinsky Palace, 1870, bear her name, fostering ballet and architecture that define Russian heritage. Yet Maria's story warns of isolation's cost. Power amplified her pain, from cultural shock to betrayal. Her daughter's marriage to Prince Alfred bridged Russia and Britain, influencing pre-World War I alliances. But the 1917 revolution's horrors, executing her grandson Nicholas II, underscored monarchy's fragility. Maria and her daughter teach resilience amid loss, duty's price, and empathy's importance in leadership. In today's scrutinized world, they remind us, behind titles lie hearts craving connection. As we conclude, envision Maria the Empress, frail yet forgiving, blessing her husband's children in her final breath, an act of grace amid betrayal, and her daughter, once vibrant, fading in exile, clutching memories of lost empires. Their journeys highlight life's contradictions. The throne's dazzle hides deep solitude, But in that fragility lies profound beauty. They endured with quiet dignity, leaving us to ponder, what would we sacrifice for love, family, or crown? May their stories linger, a gentle reminder of our shared humanity.